Tibet, a land under the control of the Chinese. It has always been so, or at least you would think that. It wasn't always like this. The Chinese took it by force. The Chinese invasion of Tibet is an event that is often pushed aside, as it is not an event that affected America. Most people may wonder or not know about what the invasion is. The Chinese Liberation Army's invasion of Tibet, starting in 1950, was a massive conflict sparked by territorial disputes involving both Tibet and China. This invasion resulted in China gaining the territory of Tibet and the deaths of tens of thousands of Tibetans. The long-term effects can still be felt today through the eradication of Tibetan culture, religion, and freedom, which continues to this day. The Tibetans declared independence from China on February 13, 1913, after the Dalai Lama returned from a 4-year exile due to China dispatching some troops against Tibet. The Tibetans then had 37 years of independence before China, who thought Tibet was and had always been part of itself, decided to try to gain Tibet back into their land. In 1949, the Chinese Communist Party had started to gain control in the Chinese political system with Joseph Stalin's support. Multiple protests about this broke out all over Tibet as they disagree with the communist system. Seeing this, the political leader, or Kashag, made all the people in Tibet related to the Chinese government leave, essentially cutting ties with them. During these exiles, China formed the PRC, or People's Republic of China, in October 1949, and wasted little time making their intents, one of them being to capture and make Tibet their own, known. Then, on January 1st, 1950, PRC invaded and captured the city of Kamdo, defeating any resistance that tried to stop them. The government officials fled the country for fear of their safety, and it became the Tibetan government in exile. This capture resulted in the signing of the 17-point agreement, a fake compromise that, to the Tibetan government in exile's horror, made it clear that China had sovereignty over Tibet in exchange for a ceasefire. Fortunately, China did not make it their first priority to socially reform Tibet, and they had general religious freedom even with thousands of soldiers occupying the country. They did, however, abolish Tibetan slavery and serfdoms, though re-implementing them later in their favor later, and they also say, without proof, that they reduced taxes, unemployment, and beggary, while also establishing work projects, which were actually just slavery rings. They established secular schools, thereby reducing the value of the monasteries, and constructed running water and electrical systems in Lhasa. This has not been confirmed or disproven by anyone, so we don't know for sure whether or not it's true, but it's evident today that they at least modernized it. They did, however, start doing land reforms. They elected random landlords who would run the work projects to reform the land, and they arbitrarily punished the Tibetans as if in a prison camp. These punishments would include maiming, torture, and even death. After about 6 years of this, in 1956, uprisings and rebellions started in the eastern provinces of Kham and Amdo, where land reform was already in full force. These rebellions then spread to western Kham and Yusang. Then, in 1957, the armed Tibetan guerrillas, ambushed convoys of the Chinese People's Liberation Army. This uprising was supported by the American CIA with military training, support camps in Nepal, and airlifts. Unfortunately, more than 90% of all participants trained by the CIA were never heard from again, meaning they were either captured or killed. It has been recently revealed that China used the USSR planes to bomb monasteries and religious places during the uprising. This led to a full-scale countrywide protest known as the Lhasa Uprising. Fearing for the Dalai Lama's safety, troops surrounded his palace and guarded it while he made a daring escape to India. After the Lhasa uprisings and the Dalai Lama's exile in 1959 to 1962, the Chinese started starving the Tibetans in what was known as the Great Chinese Famine. The Panchen Lama, who was in charge at the time of the Dalai Lama's exile, wrote a document to the United Nations describing the hardships his people were facing. The United Nations condemned the Chinese, but didn't administer much help or support otherwise. As an almost mocking response to this condemnation, the Chinese set up a false government called the TAR, or Tibetan Autonomous Region, which was supposedly going to be run by ethnic Tibetans. Unfortunately, this was only a ploy to save China's reputation, and the only person with real power in this false government was the chairman, who was actually a Chinese Communist Party member that wasn't even remotely Tibetan. After the TAR was formed, no other large noticeable events occurred, aside from the Panchen Lama dying from a sudden heart attack in 1989, up until 2008, when riots broke out among Tibetans. They attacked many shops and business run by ethnic Chinese people. The Chinese government responded almost immediately, implementing curfews and restricting travel for all Tibetans, while also cracking down on protesters, even if they were peaceful. To this day, the TAR is still in control of Tibet, even though groups have claimed, with proof, that the system is a human rights violation. However, most governments recognize Tibet as part of China, and no world governments recognize the Tibetan government in exile as the actual government of Tibet. Even today, the 17-point agreement compromise is still in effect, and Tibetan culture and its people are being stomped out, both figuratively and literally. They have little to no say in their own government, and their spiritual leader is still in exile. The conflict is ongoing, with protests and brutal police response. There is no end in sight because no governments care enough to go into that conflict. And so, with no real compromise on the horizon, Tibet remains unwillingly a part of China, and the conflict continues.